Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Lynda, and I'm originally from Michigan, now living in the St. Louis metro area. I'm a college coach with School Match for You and have a daughter at University of Chicago.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. Good morning, friends. If you're a regular listener of our podcast, you know I love me some crepe myrtles. And if you're not from the South or not really follow different Southern trees, you may not be familiar with crepe myrtles, but just put CRAPE MYRTLE in Google image, and you'll see how beautiful they are. We have 31 on our property now because I keep buying more, but I think I hit my quota. I don't think I can convince Anitra to get one more crepe myrtle, but they're busting out with resplendent colors all over, and it's got me in a great mood today. Now, friends, at the end of episode 443, in our preview of this episode, I said I was going to address another missed opportunity, and then we'd have our interview. But Kerry from suburban Chicago sent in an excellent time-sensitive question about whether it's okay for her student to apply to a handful of schools. And she gave some good reasons why she didn't want to have a really large list. So Lisa and I answered that question on Friday, and so you're going to hear that in today's episode. You'll also get to hear Lynda's part 204 of her excellent interview with Colonel Robert Kirkland. That's just packed with tips and insights into how admissions practices work at the Naval Academy in Annapolis, the Army in West Point, the Air Force in Colorado Springs. But before either of those sections, I want to address the missed opportunity of not getting your student on a number of different college campuses fairly early in the process. And I'm going to address when to start doing these visits, where to go. And before we dive into that content, we do have a few announcements. Now, Stylianos, our webmaster, Stylianos, that's such a cool name. He's from Greece. By the way, he lives in Greece. But he's on vacation until July 9th. So the Matt Carpenter interview on loans and the Surface Academy interview won't be up on our website until probably a few days. I don't know for sure how soon he'll get to it, but got to give a guy about 3 days after he gets back from vacation. So they're probably not going to be up on our website until around the 11th or 12th of July. And we are now only 15 days away from your opportunity to ask your questions to 3 experts on how colleges admit students who are homeschooled. Now, we had a listener send in her thoughts after she heard our interview with our experts. And I want to play what Kathy from California had to say about that interview.
Hi, YCBK. This is Kathy from California again. I really wanted to thank you for answering my question last month regarding my daughter in college who is looking for internships. Just wanted to thank you both, or thank you all, for the interview with the homeschooling experts. I really enjoyed that. And at first I thought, how could this possibly be relevant? But I really found it interesting. It helped to demystify a whole bunch of stereotypes and really gave me a new appreciation for the flexibility to work with your child in the interests that they have directly. And in fact, it's kind of made me a little sad that traditional high schools in some ways might kind of zap the creativity and individualization from kids, since there's really, they just struggle with so much time in the day to pursue what really excites them. And I'll just share as a kind of an example of this in my day job. I work at a private Christian 6 through 12 school, and I speak directly with 8th grade families who are coming into our high school program, either that have been there already or who are new to the school. And this interview totally helped me understand kind of where some of these families are coming from. For example, last September, there was a family who joined our school in eighth grade. And and they had been homeschooling. And after about a month into it, the mom just said, nope, never mind. We're going back to homeschooling. And it really was because in eighth grade, there was so much busy work or worksheets that the mom called out that she thought was just a waste of her time, and really thought she could be spending that on deepening her Latin or any of her other like theater or anything else that she was interested in. And I just couldn't argue with that. So again, the interview was super helpful, thought-provoking. The experts were amazing. And I just really wanted to thank you for kind of going deep with that. That's pretty much it. I really just appreciate so much everything you guys do, and I can't wait to meet you guys in California. I'm really hoping to get down to NACAC in the LA area, but if not, I will definitely try to find you guys when you're up here in Palo Alto or Fremont, and really just looking forward to that. So thank you again for all you do. Hope you're well. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, Kathy, for that. And if you're just curious, how does all of this work for homeschoolers? I strongly encourage you to go to yourcollegeboundkid.com/events and sign up for this 1-hour Q&A. It'll start at 8:30 Eastern, 7:30 Central, 6:30 Mountain, and 5:30 Pacific. Now, if you missed my interview with our three esteemed guests, Liam Daly, Michelle Lavard, and Holly Ramsey, that interview is up on our website. And please spread the word about the 1-hour Q&A. And if you heard our last 2 Thursday episodes, then you know Matt Carpenter answered questions about federal direct student loans, state loans, Parent Plus loans, as well as private loans. Well, you can ask Matt anything at all about paying for college on the webinar he'll be having 2 weeks after the homeschool webinar. So that's also on a Tuesday. It's August 6th. It also starts at 8:30 Eastern, 7:30 Central, 6:30 Mountain, and 5:30 Pacific. So while you're going to yourcollegeboundkid.com/events, sign up for the Matt Carpenter 1-hour Q&A and come prepared to fire your paying for college questions at him. He's ready. Bring it on. All right, friends, let's dive in with our content for the day. So, friends, a question that often comes up in counseling is this: when should we start visiting colleges? Now, second sibs or third sibs, especially if they're not that far in age from an older sib, they often have the advantage because they've often been, on those college visits, and they've been exposed. And I noticed that they come in with a lot more knowledge and a lot more self-understanding, having been on a lot of campuses already. But in general, it's a hard question for me to answer because there's no one-size-fits-all answer to this question. One of the biggest factors is going to be, is the family just looking at local schools, or are they doing a broader geographical search? That can play a role. How selective are the schools can also play a role in terms of when you want to start. But one of the biggest factors is, what's the mindset of the student? Is a student up for visiting colleges? Or is dragging your student to a campus when they're diametrically opposed to it going to feel tantamount to going to a dentist who's trying to pull a tooth from the recalcitrant patient, which, by the way, would be me. I had dental surgery a few weeks ago, and I never shared this, but I have a terrible gag reflex with dentists. It's terrible. And the thing is, I never had this before. It's so weird how the mind is psychologically. Like I started getting this really bad gag reflex probably around 2017. And I really try not to go to, this is terrible advice, but I try not to go to the dentist because I'm just going to gag and it's terrible. I have to do all kinds of things. So I try to floss and brush every morning, every evening, and use mouthwash so that I never have any problems. But anyway, so I can relate to that terrible gag reflex. So if that's the reaction that your student's going to have visiting campuses, then you're going to push it back a little bit. Certainly the end of 9th grade can be a great time to get on campuses. And if that's not going to work for many reasons, including the students not ready, the halfway point of high school, at the end of 10th, or as I like to refer to it, for your rising 11th grader over the summer, is a great time to start. True story for you, friends. A few years ago, I worked with a very successful Colorado businessman. And he said to me, what is wrong with these people? Why are they visiting all these colleges? And they don't even know if their college students accepted to the colleges they are visiting. Now, at the time he said that, his student was in the 12th grade. So he was referring to 12th graders traveling around, his kids' peers and conversations with their parents, visiting before admissions decisions were released. It made no sense to him. And I certainly can understand why he would feel this way. I mean, we're in the information age, and we can get so much information from the internet these days. And I'm not of the belief that you need to visit all of your schools before decisions are released. Almost all schools have very elaborate visits, accepted student visits, that some of them even span over a second day. But many of them are full-day events, 6-hour events, usually at least 4-hour events, and usually more. And February, March, April of your senior year. But I did push back on this businessman about not getting out on more campuses on the students list. And I was a 12th grader. I'd like to see students get to at least a half a dozen different schools by January of their junior year. And it's a missed opportunity not to do that, in my opinion. And I know what some of you are probably thinking. These visits are expensive, but I'm not talking about hotel, rent-a-car, and airfare trips. I'm not even necessarily talking about visiting colleges that your student will likely apply to, although that certainly would be optimal and that would be ideal. What I've learned over the years is that if we give our students our intake questionnaire, which we try to improve every year, and it's already lengthy, 120 questions for students and 50 for parents, it's just hard for a student to accurately answer some very important questions that will shape the search and lead to informed visits if they don't have a frame of reference. A lot of students that I work with start sometime between January of the sophomore year and January of the junior year. That's kind of like the sweet spot in there when a large number of people start. Certainly lots of people do come after January and do the spring of the junior year and even the rising summer of the junior year. But increasingly over the years I've been doing this, the process has started earlier and earlier. And in the past, what I would do for these students that would come between January of the sophomore year and the summer of the junior year, I would have them complete a detailed questionnaire, submit a boatload of records that we would request, meet with them and their parents for a 30-minute review of all their responses, probe a little deeper, go over anything that contradicts each other, ask what questions they have, and then have a 60-minute college list roll-up meeting in the next meeting. But I've added a step, and it's made me a much better counselor. It's made me much more effective with list building. I can't always do this step if they're starting late in the fall of the rising senior year or even late in the summer of the rising senior year. But when they start a little earlier, you can do this. And the step I've added is to get them on to approximately 6 schools within 2 hours of where they live that are very different. Now, you say very different in what way? Well, that depends on the student, because for some, I'll have a women's college in there. For others, I won't. For some, I'll have an MSI, minority serving institution, or an HBCU. For some, I won't. For some, it'll be an art school, and for some, I won't. For some, it'll be a tech institute or a 2-year school, and others don't have that. It just doesn't make sense because there's no way they're ever going to consider those schools. But for everyone, I'm going to want a sampling of a certain kinds of different schools on there, with rare exceptions. So one would be a school in a city that has what I will refer to as a protected or enclosed campus, a very strong campus feel. I like students to visit that kind of school because I find it can produce a very strong reaction. I also like them to visit a school in a city that doesn't have natural borders, that more bleeds into the city. So there's no definitive barriers between the college and the city. Students can have very strong reactions to that type of environment. I like them to visit a school in a college town. I like them to visit in a school in a more suburban setting. I like them to visit a school that's somewhat more remote. And I'm being a little general here because if a student is self-aware, and there's no way in the world they'll ever attend some of these schools, and they feel very, very strongly about it, then we'll substitute this out for something else. I like to see them visit a school that feels a lot more homogenous with similar types of kids, and one that feels much more eclectic and diverse. I like them to visit a school that's got a palpable sense of athletic school spirit that just kind of oozes out of everyone they see, and they get that vibe. And for a more serious student, a more intense with more of a driven vibe. And, like them to visit places where they see green spaces and the quad versus more of a concrete kind of school. Schools that are more spread out in their landscape and their size, and ones that are more compact. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. I thought you said 6. This sounds like 15. Well, there are overlaps of types. Sometimes you get all 3 or 4 of these things in one school. I also want them to visit a place that's more residential, because that has more of a community feel, and one where 50% or more are commuters, and certainly schools at different sizes. Because there's a difference between a school, say, under 2,000 versus 10 or 12 versus 20 versus 40 or larger. Like, those are all different sizes, and they can feel different. And, I wanted them to do specific things on those visits, but that's beyond the scope of today's podcast. And that's also varies from person to person. But there's a reason why I want students to do this, and why I think it's really, really important. And before I get into what that reason is, I want to give you an example. So I'm going to take you back to when I was doing boarding school admissions for 8 years. I did boarding school admissions. One of the biggest challenges we would face is boarding school is a foreign world to most people, right? Only 39,000 students go to college prep boarding school. That's 1 in 500. 1 in 500, right? It's like way less than 1%, 0.2%. So it's a totally foreign world. So when you're traveling and you're recruiting and doing boarding school admissions, you hear a lot of things like, aren't boarding schools for bad kids? I remember one boarding school recruitment trip I took, and this is a long time ago. This is like 2005. And I was in Menlo Park, California. And I was visiting a family, and it was an alumni family. And I mean, obviously we do a trip like this, like you do lots of things, right? Like you go to fairs, you do school visits, you do receptions, but you also do some other stuff. So this was a particular dinner that I actually had in the family's home with an alumni family. And both of the parents actually met at our boarding school, Westtown School. They were both extremely successful. I won't say anymore because I want to protect their confidentiality. But I will never forget the mom. And she said to me, and keep in mind, she went to boarding school, had an incredible experience, was totally sold on it. So that's all that background. Most people don't have that background. So the mom says to me, she says, if I send my kid to boarding school, you may as well just emblazon on my forehead, bad parent in caps. So I had a tough job. And one thing I came to realize was one thing that made the job difficult is that I was talking about something that had to be experienced to be understood. So how can you talk to people about something that has to be experienced to be understood? So long after I left that world, moved down to Atlanta, started a company doing, college counseling and boarding school at the time. I really don't do much of boarding anymore, but I did back then. I created a boarding school documentary series, and I was all in on this project, like hardcore for like 4 months. I ate, slept, and breathed this project. And so it was a 6-hour boarding school documentary, hired a film crew, interviewed 107 people from 30 different boarding schools, parents, current parents, past parents, current students, alumni, administrators. Got 30 leading boarding schools in the country to all send original footage of their top photography from their schools so people could see the schools. And I did all that because, like I said, I realized boarding school had to be experienced to be understood. And this isn't about boarding school. It's about using that as an analogy. That's how visits are. Visits are about feel. Schools need to be felt to be understood. So how will you know if a school is too small or too large, or what type of campus, even architecture, resonates with you? Believe it or not, architecture can have a really powerful effect on people. And quite frankly, everything you like and you don't like. Anything you feel particularly strongly about is really important. So getting on these campuses gives you feel, and you just write down all your pros, all your cons to a wide swath of different schools. And if you're getting assistance from a professional to help you with your college list, this is like giving them a Christmas present. A list of everything you liked and didn't like about every school you've been on. That's one of our 70 questions on our questionnaire. List every college you've been on, write down everything, tell me everything you liked and didn't like. And it's one of the most helpful questions we have. If you're doing it yourself, if you're a DIYer, do-it-yourselfer, it's going to help you tremendously as you think through this process, because you're going to, as you expand to a broader geographic search that may involve hotel, airfare, rent-a-cars, you can now target schools that are similar to the ones that resonated with you, and you can eschew the ones that repelled you. The average student that transfers takes an extra 27 credit hours to graduate, basically an extra year. So doing this exercise is it can't guarantee that you won't transfer, but it will greatly diminish it, because you're going to get to know yourself. And one of the things I learn more every year is that this college process is so much about self-discovery, which is one of the reasons why it's really rewarding. It's like self-discovery with a couple thousand choices out there, which can also make it challenging. And you can also save a lot of money by not traveling all over the place to visit schools that aren't a good fit. Now, you want to be sure to do reflection after these visits. I personally, when I do them myself, I like to speak into voice memos, which is on the iPhone and the Notes app. But others like a good old notepad and paper. And I think it's really important to do that before you start talking to parents and others around, because then you have all these voices in your mind. Just get away, some private, quiet time. And before you leave, just record your impressions, your overall impressions, what you liked and what you didn't like. So to me, it's a missed opportunity to not get on many different campuses before you start applying to colleges, preferably a year or so before, because you can use these visits to shape your final college list. Ideally, you visit a good number of the schools that you are actually interested in applying to, especially if schools are using demonstrated interest in their calculations. But to give you a feel, think about it. When you're house hunting or apartment searching, the internet tour and research is extremely helpful. But there's no substitute for touring the apartment or the home, because feel matters. Employers, if you're hiring someone for a job, resumes are nice, recommendations are great, applications are essential, but the interview is where you get feel. Stepping on a lot of college campuses that are very different early in the process gives you feel, and feel matters. And it will help you immensely in deciding which schools to visit if you are going to visit in the broader area across the country, or something, not in the immediate area. And it will help you to either knock schools off your list or add schools to your list, because you'll get to know yourself more. And I always say, trust your instincts. Trust your instincts. Trust your instincts. We will now transition to a great question from a listener from suburban Chicago.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Lisa, we haven't had any updates on your students lately. Is Lily going to be in Atlanta coming up here in the fall, or is she taking time off? What's the plans?
She's going to start at SCAD Atlanta in the master's program in advertising. I think it starts right after Labor Day.
Nice.
So she's got an apartment that she'll move into, and
good for her.
And meanwhile, she's just living her best life.
You might lose her to Atlanta. When they go, they get jobs.
Well, I honestly think that I might, because I think her boyfriend's also decided to
Oh,
move to
you're
Atlanta,
you're
not in
done.
with her, but his company will transfer him. So I figure they might be there for a while, which is that's just cool. It's a great
Yeah,
city. I think
it is.
I've only been to Atlanta once, but it seems like it's such a good place for young people.
It is. It's the average age is like 33 or something. Like it is a
Yeah.
young person city with a lot to do and explore. I mean, I think your area is pretty good too. It's bigger, noticeably bigger.
Yeah, it's a lot bigger.
Yeah, yeah.
The traffic is a lot bigger.
It is. That's one reason why I think you're probably would be happy with where you are more so than Charlotte, because Charlotte is pretty bad right now, especially 77 when I go through there. It's reminding me, I live in a non-traffic place, but I chose that intentionally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I know when she was looking at apartments, she was just amazed. Even like going 1 mile in Atlanta could take like 40 minutes. So she ended up renting an apartment that's like you can see SCAD from the window of her
There you
apartment.
go.
And she can just walk there and
There you
walk back
go.
because
Gotta
I
be
think that's
smart.
the only reliable way you're going to get to class on time.
Smarter rather than harder.
Mm-hmm.
So let's dive in. I'm going to play a question from Kerry from your old neck of the woods, suburban
right.
Chicago. You never know. It might be Vernon Hills. You never know.
It could be. I know a lot of Kerrys. So
Yeah. So we'll play the question and then get your thoughts.
Hello, my name is Kerry from suburban Chicago. I'm so grateful for all you do. Thank you. I can't even begin to say how much I've learned from finding your podcast and listening to it faithfully for the last 2 years. My question is regarding number of applications. My rising senior has some geographic desires as to where she would like to stay for college and a rather niche major. From listening to the podcast, I know I have a standard strong student with a very balanced list, I promise. Is it acceptable in this culture of applying to more and more places to only apply to 5 or 6 schools? Or is that foolish? Thanks for the help.
I really loved this question, actually, and I wish it was a question that more people would ask. Kerry, it is absolutely okay to apply to 5 or 6 schools as long as you know that there are like a couple, probably pretty reliable schools and you can afford the schools and your student would be happy at any of them. Why make life harder than it has to be, right? Given that your student has like some, a very good idea of what they want, a niche major, they want to be in a certain geographic area. I mean, that would make your list smaller just by cutting it down. So I feel very good about that. And I wish more people would think about simplifying their list and just maybe applying to 5 or 6 schools. It would make their lives better, might make your and my life better, but mostly it would make their lives better.
Yeah, I love this question as well. And, I'm just thinking about this because there's a listener to our podcast who's going to hear this, I'm sure, because they're faithful and a regular listener. It's not somebody I'm working with, but somebody I had a privilege of meeting. And she was on her 3rd student going through this process. And she made the statement, all these people out here applying to 20 schools are just chasing prestige. And I'm not doing that. I'm not doing it. I had a situation this year where family came to me, and it reminds me a lot of Kerry. It was a referral. It was a Georgia family. And they were hearing all of this, you got to apply. They were even getting this from their private school community, the 20 school thing. And they're like, I just don't want to do that. Do I have to do that? So they came to me and they said, I really would like to apply to 6 schools. And I supported them 100%. I said, as long as, and the regular listeners to our podcast know this, that I feel this way, I want 3 likelies or probables. I want 3 likelies or probables. And a likely or probable, to be a good likely or probable, is not just based on your chances of getting in. A good likely or probable one, it's what Lisa said, needs to have financial fit, needs to be a component of it. But also it should be a place that you're happy to go to. I see too many people that understand, I can't have all super selective schools. Either a parent or someone is telling them they can't do that. So they add schools with the mindset of, I'm not going to them, but I'll add them to appease the adults or the voices in my ear. That's not a good likely or probable. It doesn't have to be your aspirational school, but it should be a school you have a 75 to 95% chance of admission, which is my definition of a probable or likely. Now, I would prefer at least 2 of the schools be in that 90% plus chance of admission. So on the higher end of a probable or likely school. So I was happy because it's true. It's very rare. I mean, I can't even remember the last time somebody said this to me. Now, I'm not saying you have to do this either. I'm not saying it's wrong to apply to more. So I definitely don't want to say that, but it's not wrong to apply to 5 or 6. So, so we built this students list with 6 schools, and it was stressful for a while because she wanted to take a shot at a school. I told her with an ED at best, it was a 1 in 7 chance with an ED. So they took the chance at that ED, and it was a denial. And then there was another school on that list that was on the cusp of reaching an unlikely or a long shot. So it was like another 15%er, highly selective flagship school. And so both of those schools came back because one was an early action and one was an ED. And so there was some stressful moments in their family for a while, not for me, but for them. And I can understand that. But then she got in the other 4 of the 6. She was very happy. Really, she liked all 4 of the other 4. So she still ended up having to take quite a bit of time to go through processes to figure out, which of those other 4 that she wanted to pick. But she ended up, she's very, very, very excited to go to the school that she picked from that list. And normally when a family says this, they have the philosophy, which I usually believe in, which is it's about fit and match. You believe in it too, Lisa. All of us, do, really, our whole entire team. And selectivity can be a component of it. It can even be a very important component. It's not the only component. And so, the only thing that I would say is, so she talked about geography. Kerry basically said she's got some strong feelings on geography. We're not sure if that's stay in the Midwest or go to, for all we know, whatever, Colorado, we don't know. And she said niche major. So the only thing I want to say is if she has a highly competitive audition-based niche major, right, I don't like to see students have that short of a list. If you're talking about programs like acting and musical theater and, choral music and dance, like these programs where you have auditions, they tend to be very, very competitive with really low admit rates. But she said, I can assure you it's a balanced list. So I say I loved this question. And I love this question partly because I want others to hear the answer.
Yeah.
And also, hopefully, we can give Kerry the assurance that to block out the noise, because I know from doing this that she has a lot of voices in her ear saying she's being ridiculous.
Yeah. But what's interesting? I was at a lunch not too long ago and with a bunch of college counselors, and they were all talking about their own children and their application process to college and where they ended up. And so I started asking everyone, how many schools did your kid apply to? And it'd be like 1. They ED'd to 1 school. They applied to 2 schools. They knew about this one. They applied to 3 schools. Nobody was applying their kids to 15 schools. And these are people who are quite educated about the process. So I just want to put that out there that, those in the know tend not to do this in my experience.
It's so interesting you say that, Lisa, because, Kerry's ED to Davidson, but she really had 5 or 6 other schools that she was going to apply to on her list. It was about this number. Joy applied to about 5 or 6. Her situation was a little different because she was an athletic recruit, and there was a lot involved in that, and her made her search different than others. But yeah, both of my kids were really around that 6 number, Mm-hmm. That now I don't want to apply that. The one thing I always tell every family, I'm starting to think it may be the most asked question that I get, which, you know what I'm going to say, how many schools should I apply to? And I do say there's not a perfect number. There's not a perfect number because there are a lot of circumstances that can lead to somebody applying to more, for me, encouraging somebody to apply to more. And I mentioned one of them earlier, which is all of them are really competitive, like, audition-based majors. Other circumstances where I encourage people to apply to more schools are if they haven't had a chance to visit very many colleges, and they're kind of having to do this process a little later by see where they get in and buy themselves 6 extra months. So now they have until May 1st to do a lot of the visiting, and they're not quite so sure what they want. I like people to be on the higher end. Another time when I will recommend more schools is when prestige is very important to the family. Prestige is very important to a lot of the families that I work with, and you do give yourself more chances if you cast a wider net. And it's my job to challenge families occasionally, but ultimately it's my job to give them what is important to them. And if prestige is important, in a lot of ways it's similar to why audition-based majors need to be looking at more schools because of the lower admit rates. And casting a wider net is going to give you a greater chance of success. And then also, if money is like really, really important and they're going to need to compare financial aid packages, it can be in their best interest to be on the higher end. I'm not talking 20 plus, but those are some of the circumstances where it will often make sense for someone to apply to more. But this is different. This is someone who knows these schools, from what I can apply, has a good sense of them. They're balanced. They like them. Those are the cases where, this number is good. Like the other family that I told you about, that family visited every one of the schools at once or twice. So her 6 were like all vetted, not just by, internet research and talking to lots of people, but by on-site visits. So those are the cases also where I feel better about a smaller number. But when you get people that start the process really late, haven't been on many campuses, they don't know that much about what they want, money's a bigger factor, I will encourage people in those cases to cast a wider net. That's why I really can never answer that question with any sort of precision. What's the magic number? It's really going to be different for every person. And then also sometimes people will have an early decision, and especially if they have some early action schools that notify before the regular decision deadlines, I will have students that see where they get in either ED or early action. And if those early action release notices come out before regular decision deadlines, it's very common for someone to say, well, now that I'm in this school, I know that I wouldn't be picking some of these over this one, so I'm going to drop them off my list. So I think it's good to have maybe a bigger circle of schools in some instances that are on your radar, especially if things don't go as well as you're hoping in the early process, especially if you're doing it on your own. Like I knew with this other student, I felt quite confident she was going to get in at least 3 of those other 4. I thought she'd probably go 4 for 4, but I knew she'd go at least 3 for 4. So it didn't bother me at all other than I had to sort of manage the stress of the family, but Any other thoughts?
No, I think you've covered all of the possible angles on this that I can think of.
You and me, we both did it.
Yeah, but good luck, Kerry.
Yeah,
I
thanks,
hope it
Kerry.
all works out.
Yeah, Kerry, send a message back to us on SpeakPipe when it's all said and done, and we know where she's going, and I can always play that on the air.
Perfect.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, in part 2 of Lynda's excellent interview with Colonel Robert Kirkland, Rob starts out by explaining the 2 different ways that congressmen can tip the scales for who they nominate. He explains the competitive process and the principled process, and he tells us how each process works. Rob explains what a Freedom of Information request is. Rob explains what the acronym SAL is and how it helps with Service Academy admissions. Rob answers the question, are the Service Academies test optional? And you got to listen to what he has to say. Rob explains how the SAT and ACT scores the academies are looking for are very different from what scores the average admit has. Rob explains the candidate score and each applicant gets, and he breaks down each factor and how much weight is put on each factor. This is a detailed breakdown of how applicants are evaluated, and it's something you don't see from competitive schools that do holistic admissions. Rob talks about whether the high school you are coming from is factored into the admission decision. Rob talks about how the candidate fitness assessment works. Rob answers the question, is calculus required for service academies? And then Rob talks about the 10 to 12 criteria that teachers are asked to use when evaluating a candidate. And finally, Rob explains the 3 teacher recs the service academies want to receive. Listen and enjoy.
If it's a situation where there are like 30, like you mentioned, a competitive district, does the congressional member, do they have any, can they put their thumb on the scale? Can they, list a favorite or guarantee an admission to one of the academies?
Yeah, so there's different ways that the member of Congress can designate individuals, and the 2 major ways are either the competitive process or the principal process. So let me talk about each one. First is the competitive process. So what happens is if the member of Congress nominates a slate, say of 15 individuals, and does it by the competitive process, what they do is they give that slate to the academy and they say, you choose the best individual to get an appointment, or individuals to get an appointment to an academy. So that's the competitive process. About 60 to 70% of the members of Congress do it by the competitive process, where they give the slate to the academy and the academy chooses the best person. When you're talking about how does maybe a member of Congress tip the scales, there's about 30 to 40% of the members of Congress do it by a what we would call a principal process, or principal nomination process, where they designate the top person in the district. So what they do is they go through the process, they look at the individuals, and then they say, well, I want this particular individual to be the top person. And so if that person is designated as the principal, the academies in general will give that person the appointment to a service academy if they're qualified. So that's kind of the way that some members of Congress tip the scales towards one particular individual, is using the principal nominating the slate and giving the slate to the academy, giving it by the principal way of nominating.
Got it. So is there a way to find out how how your congressperson does that, or do you just have to ask?
You can do one of 2 ways. You can just ask the member of Congress. Sometimes they'll let you know. There's generally in each office, congressional office, there's a person who is designated to be kind of handle service academy appointments processes, and so they may tell you how the member of Congress is nominating. If they don't, you can always go to the individual, to one of the service academies, and do what's known as a Freedom of Information Act request. And so each academy has just all you have to do is type in Google Freedom of Information West Point, and you can just write a letter to them asking for your particular member of Congress and how they've nominated in the past, and the academy then will give you that information so you can know how the slate was designated by your particular member of Congress.
Okay. Are there ways to improve your chances for nomination? Should you start volunteering for a congressperson's campaign when you're a freshman in high school or something like that? I'm kind of joking there, but are there ways to improve your chances for nomination?
Yes, I mean, the same criteria oftentimes that's used for admission to a service academy is used by the member of Congress to determine, who gets a nomination. I would say I would go back and tell you that, that getting a nomination in general is not that difficult. I think that is very much of a kind of a misunderstanding, is that for most congressional districts, if you want to get a nomination for a particular service academy, generally you can get it, at least for one service academy. As long as you have solid SAT scores and you're a solid high school performer. What I mean by solid SAT scores is or ACT scores would be like somewhere around 1100 SAT score, and you're taking a solid college preparation curriculum, you should expect to get a nomination. But the main parts that in order to be able to improve both getting a nomination, getting into a service academy, would mainly be like through doing well on your SAT test, keeping up your high school grades, and then doing things that are athletic and leadership. So we have an acronym that's used in the military. It's called a SAL, a scholar, athlete, and leader. So scholar, I've kind of already described the SAT score and academic rigor and grades. Athlete, if you can participate in high school sports or competitive sports outside of high school, that is considered to be improve your chances. And then leadership, are you doing things both in and out of your school where you lead others in projects or goals? So the academies want to bring people on to each of their academies that are leaders, that are already people that are already comfortable leading their peers, so that when they get to the academy can simply develop that leadership that's already been in place before they get there. So anything you can do to increase your scholar, athlete, leader profile is going to increase your chances of a nomination and ultimately your chances of getting into a service academy.
Okay. So a couple of things. You mentioned test scores. The service academies are not test optional. They are still looking for those test scores, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Even during the pandemic, the academies were very, very hesitant to come off of the SAT or ACT scores. Even at the height of the pandemic, you had to have a very good excuse to not take the SAT or ACT. So yes, testing for the SAT or ACT is mandatory. And I would tell you also that the Academy Super scores their tests. So they take the best of the verbal and math section of the SAT, and then the best of the 4 sections of the ACT in order to determine your top score.
Good. And do they want to see AP scores or IB or?
Right.
Yes, they're looking for that. Okay.
Yeah, they are. They're looking for both. They're looking for academic rigor. So obviously SAT. One of the things that I find that is oftentimes lost is, and we'll talk about the whole candidate score and kind of how that's computed. But I think that I think that the candidate must understand the importance of the SAT or ACT to the overall appointment process, and it dwarfs almost anything else in this process. So yeah, certainly if you're taking AP courses or IB courses, that goes into kind of the academic rigor of your courses, but you can't lose sight of the importance of the SAT or ACT. Yes, but IB and AP courses are important in the overall determination who gets in.
You mentioned like having an 1100 SAT. That's kind of baseline for a nomination, because looking at their kind of median scores, they're higher than that 1100. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's correct. Because remember that each member of Congress can nominate up to 15 candidates, right? But each member of Congress is only guaranteed one admission. So of those 15, only one is guaranteed an admission to an academy each year. So obviously that's the best person who has the best overall score. So I mean, you may get a nomination, and have an 1100 SAT, but as far as getting to that number one slot for that particular member of Congress, there's likely people who have much higher SAT scores or ACT scores that are ranking higher of those 15 candidates.
Okay. So you mentioned the whole candidate score. talk about that, what that is, and the importance of it. What all goes into that score?
Right. So yeah, this is an important part of the process, because you you need to understand how the academy is grading you, right? And it's a it's a score where they compile different parts of your application and give an overall score. And so I'll break out each part of this and kind of give you an idea. Now, there may be maybe some small changes in percentage between the different service academies, but in general, it follows this formula. So the number one is SAT or ACT score. So 40% of the overall whole candidate score is your SAT or ACT score. And of that 40%, 60% is weighted towards math. So for example, for the SAT, your score, your overall score is going to be higher, even though, say, both candidates get a 1400 SAT score. If the candidate has a 750 math and a 650 verbal, they're going to have a higher SAT overall score into their whole candidate score than someone that has a 750 verbal and a 650 math. So 40% is SAT or ACT with a 60% weighting to the math score. 20% is your high school grades, rigor, and the competitiveness of your high school. So they take into account what courses you've taken, the grades you've gotten on your courses, and your competitiveness of your high school, which is mainly measured at what percentage go on to 2 and 4 year colleges and universities. So the academies know which high schools are more competitive than others also. So they kind of have a formula that they use, and they give you a score based upon kind of those three things. Rank in class has been de-emphasized because there's a lot of high schools now who don't rank students. So they've generally de-emphasized the rank in class and kind of have looked more holistically at the candidate regarding their kind of high school grades and things like that. So 60% of the overall score is either SAT or ACT, and your grades, rigor of your classes, competitiveness of your high school, and your courses and grades. So the other 40% is broken up into the following: 10% is your physical fitness test. It's called a candidate fitness assessment that is given to each candidate. So how well you do on that candidate fitness assessment is 10%. 10% is your teacher evaluations. So teachers have to evaluate the candidate, and that's 10%. 10% is your leadership, how well you lead others, and how much you're involved in leadership in your community. And the final 10% is your athletics, how well you've done athletically in your high school or outside of high school, and how involved you are. So all of those have certain criteria that they do. They grant more points depending upon your leadership or things that you've done in your high school. But that wraps up to the 100% that the academies use for their scoring.
So you got to be good at math, because I know, looking at the academic majors, these schools are STEM heavy, but not exclusively so. So when they're looking at the classes you've taken, do they want to see students get to calculus, or do they have any baseline criteria like that?
They require pre-calculus, taking that in 12th grade. So that's the minimum that they require. So they're not going to give you a admission, or what we call an appointment, unless you have pre-calculus that you're taking it in the 12th grade. But I can tell you that the vast majority of candidates who are appointed to the academy will be taking calculus in 12th grade. So the requirement for either pre-calculus or calculus is there for the academies.
And you mentioned teacher evaluations. Is that different than the letters of recommendation?
Yeah, so the letters of recommendation are mainly for the members of Congress to get the nomination. The way that the academies do it is they send out an evaluation to teachers, and the teachers have to evaluate the candidate based on the criteria that the academies ask them to evaluate the candidate on. So there's like 10 to 12 different measures that the academies ask the teacher to evaluate the candidate either on a 1 to 5 or 1 to 10 scale. And some of these are academic questions about the candidate and their abilities in the classroom. Some of them are things that have nothing to do with the particular subject. So a math teacher may be asked, tell me about, how this person has demonstrated leadership, or tell me about does the person work well with their classmates? Is the person honorable in the classroom, and things like that. So the academies are asking specific evaluative questions where the teacher has to rank the candidate usually on a scale. There's also the opportunity for the teacher to give a narrative section, but it's much more kind of dictated to the teacher rather than just having the teacher do a basic letter of recommendation.
Got it. And does the candidate get to choose which teachers provide that feedback? Or is it always going to be, your 11th grade math teacher or something like that?
The academies are, they generally will ask you to do your 11th or 12th grade teacher, although they are flexible if, the teacher is unable to do the evaluation or something like that. But they generally want to see the evaluation done by a teacher who has taught the candidate recently. So generally the academies will ask for a math teacher, a science teacher, the English teacher, and then some other person in the high school, maybe a guidance counselor, maybe a coach or something like that. But generally the three teachers that the academies ask for the evaluation are science, math, and English.
So we're talking 3 or 4 evaluations.
Right.
Friends, this concludes the second part of Lynda's interview with Robert Kirkland. We hope you join us next week for part 3 of 4. On Monday's episode, Julie and I will discuss observations this year from the waitlist activity. And then we'll start a conversation about a recent article that Jeff Salingo wrote. Our roundtable will answer another question from a listener about the honors section of the Common App. And I start a brand new interview with Matt Carpenter, looking at a tool he created. We're going to discuss how it can help students and parents get a sense of what you can expect to pay in the college process. It's a 2-parter. And for our college spotlight, we got another brand new interview. It's a 4-parter with Martha Stolze. Martha's the director of admission at Beloit College in Wisconsin. It's been a while since we've been to this great state of Wisconsin, and we'll be camping out there for 4 weeks. And I close you out with this, friends, before I see you again on Thursday. College is not a prize to be won. College is a match to be made. See you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us, and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 15. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Lynda Depker, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel. And to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joy Stucker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stylianos Dimitriou. And if you want to have a coaching session with Lisa, Lynda, or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Our favorite method is for you to record your own voice at speakpipe.com/YCBK. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcasts. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Monday and Thursday.